Last summer, our family had a chance to do some camping with Tony and Kat and their kids up in Tobermory. And we spent several days just exploring a whole bunch of like cliffs and rock formations and some caves and beautiful parts of Georgian Bay. And one of the things I think my kids, and you can even see this from the picture, that we loved about it is there were no fences or signs that said you can't get too close to this edge. There was nothing telling us we couldn't climb, couldn't dive, couldn't jump, couldn't explore. And probably there should have been, but there weren't. My kids especially are so used to growing up in a world where it's like nothing even remotely safe in terms of, or unsafe is allowed in terms of fences and stuff. So it was so fun. And, whether or not that was a good thing, it was really fun. But actually, it reminds me of the fact that we've been talking about the reality that we cannot live life like that in general in our everyday interactions with people, because there are edges, there are falls, there are catastrophes, calamities, things that we're seeing happening all around us in the area of relationships and choices and money and sex and just the mishandling of things. And we've been saying it's no good to look at some of those choices that other people have made and say, I would never do that. That is arrogance. That's also just naivety, realizing like nobody thinks they'll do that. We need a better plan in our lives than I would never do that to avoid not only a fall that we couldn't recover from that would do damage to ourselves and others, but actually to love others better. We've been playing around with this idea of freedom and saying biblically, the writers of scripture don't describe freedom as you can do whatever you want. Actually, it describes freedom as, yes, you are free to choose what you will and won't do, and that true freedom is choosing to limit ourselves in the right way in order to love other people better. So that's where we've been these last few weeks. If you missed it, I encourage you to catch up. But even if you missed any of this, as we talk, this is intuitive. You will figure this out as we're journeying through this together. We introduced this idea that we borrowed from author and pastor Andy Stanley about a guardrail, something that is set in the safe zone, but keeps us well away from an edge of a fall we would never want to take, that could do damage to ourselves and the ones we love, the ones we lead, the ones we care for, the ones we're married to, or the ones we parent or in friendships with. We said we need guardrails in different areas of our life in order to love others better and protect ourselves from things that, even though we think today, well, I would never do that. Last week, we talked about having these guardrails in the area of our sexuality and our relationships. And today, we're going to talk about it in the area of our media, the stuff we watch and stream and scroll and consume. Even the most conservative estimates and a few of the studies that I read pick us at about 6 to 8 hours of media consumption a day. And that's not including the fact that many of us in recent years actually have gone to having to do more of our work virtually, online more. And so in a sense, we are at least, if not more, interacting with media and screens more than people, more than ever before. And this is like touches every age and stage. I always laugh when my dad's away and I get the call from my mom because she's trying to watch something and she doesn't know which of the 6 remotes turn on which thing, right? It doesn't matter what age and stage you're in. We're all streaming or viewing or scrolling more than ever. We are living in the technological revolution. And here's the thing. The technological revolution has swept us along faster than we can truly learn or understand it, or even realize the upside and the downsides of it. And maybe in some ways we're only early on in the revolution realizing, oh, just look at all the stuff we can do without actually having it long enough to study it, to saying, what are the long-term downsides and effects? And that was actually something that the documentary, The Social Dilemma, which came out on Netflix a number of years ago. I'd encourage you to watch that if you have never seen it. Just saying, this is happening faster than we can study it. And what that means is we don't have good guardrails around it either. Not only is this happening faster than we can study and learn it, even see the long-term effects, we definitely don't have enough or the right or any guardrails at all in the area of our media on this thing that has really taken over most of the waking hours of our day, or at least as many hours as we would spend interacting with people face to face. And just a couple of quick data points to tell us, man, we don't have good guardrails. And I was reading an article by a Stanford professor who was saying, my students are so poor at self-regulation and focus and concentration. Like, they're abysmal in their studies because they do not have a good, healthy relationship with technology. That these are the smartest students in the country, apparently, according to SATs or whatever the standards are, and yet they are unable to learn well because of technology. I read an article last week that Amnesty International has flagged TikTok as a massive risk for mental health to young people because of the mental health content that's on it. So someone who goes to TikTok, who's struggling with mental health and wants some information, okay, great, they're getting some initial information, but then the algorithm starts to pump their device and TikTok channel full, and all of it is mental health stuff, which actually serves, Amnesty International saying studies-wise, to make their mental health worse. And a third data point, if you read not-for-profit Fight the New Drug, which is campaigning against porn, just listing the statistics of, I think something like 85% of boys and 50-something% of girls have seen pornography, which I'm going to talk about later, is actually a drug. They call it Fight the New Drug because the effects of the brain on the brain are like heroin. And we would think, man, if 85% of boys and 55% of girls said to have tried heroin, we would be in a state of panic. But that's what's happening in the technological revolution. So we need good guardrails. We need good boundaries. We need to figure this out. And I would say this, the reason we need better guardrails is the flow of traffic, if I can say it this way, in the media that we're consuming is moving us towards the edge. This is not neutral. Is that not only are we streaming, scrolling, viewing more than ever, the flow of traffic or the dominant direction of what we are consuming generally is actually moving us towards the edge. And if we live in a culture, as Andy says, that just has painted lines on the edge of the road and no actual guardrails, we are in trouble. And so when it comes to our media, we need to put some guardrails in. And so we're going to get into this together today. Now, let me just be straight up with you. I found this message very hard to write. I think because in part, I'm like, man, this is such a complex topic. There's so many things to be said. I feel the weight of this, like this is heavy and so important for us. I actually wanted to scrap the message a few times. And I literally was like, Jesus, can I write on something else? Is there something else you want me to say? And I just felt like he said, no, you can't. You have to talk about this. And I do, because I love you, but I don't want to be prescriptive in one sense. And this isn't about telling you what to do or the choices you're making, but I do want to bring the wisdom that the biblical writers 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years before the internet and social media had for us on this topic. And so we're getting into it. And so it's going to be a bit of a provocative message. I'm going to make you think, and you may not agree with everything that I say, but if we can begin to think about this together and say, what would it look like for us as a community to rethink, given that what we are consuming in mass quantities, the flow of traffic is moving us towards the edge. And so I want to actually make a bit of a case for that. And then at the end, suggest some guardrails that might be helpful for you or your family, your home in the area of technology. Okay, so we're going to start with a passage of scripture that actually flags two key areas, some of the most commonly recurring areas in scripture and the teachings of the New Testament that are really moving us towards the edge, even before social media, but highly relevant today. And I want you to listen to that as I read from Ephesians 4, verses 17 to 24, and then chapter 5, verses 1 to 4. This is a letter written to actually a group of churches in the area of Ephesus. So here it is. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the church. With the Lord's authority, I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, as those who lived as if there's no God, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. In the portion of this letter, I think the most important verse is chapter 5, verse 1, where he says this: live a life filled with love. Actually, some of you perhaps might have read this from the NIV translation, just a different English translation of this same letter. And it actually says, walk in the way of love, which makes sense because it says following. It's like this idea of walking, following the example of Jesus. This is actually describing for us that love has a direction. Love has a way of walking. That direction is actually following Jesus, that Jesus leads us in the direction of what true love looks like. And he's setting this up and kind of pressing the point of this. It's like, hey, in Christ, those who are followers of Jesus, you're following him in his life. You're actually walking a direction. It is the way of love, or that your life would be filled up with and overflowing out of with love. And there are two things that he flags in here that, if we can say this, they move in the opposite direction of love, that I want to suggest actually our social media or media in general also moves us in the direction of, which is actually the flow of traffic towards the edge, in the opposite direction of the way of love. They are, and they're mentioned here, and they're mentioned many times in the New Testament. Sexual immorality and lust is one, and then greed. Now, these words and terms are problematic for us, in part because they just sound like, oh, this is like a sexual immorality. That's just like an antiquated, the Bible has a stuffy view of sex, which, as we talked about last week, that's totally not true. The Bible has this very beautiful, very open, very high view of sexuality, not a shameful, taboo way of thinking about it or talking about it. But sexual immorality just being sex outside of marriage, or sexual activity or sexual thinking, even, that's what lust is. Outside of the context of the way God has designed it for us. And then, of course, greed, that ugly thing that none of us think we have. And that these two things he highlights as being opposite from the way of love. And listen, friends, this is 2,000 years before social media, smartphones, internet, and whatever. And so more than ever in the media generation, we have to recognize that these two things are where the flow of traffic is going in the media we consume. And if I can say it this way, that generally speaking, and here's what I want to make a case for today, the media we consume is holding out for us the promise of satisfaction sexually, or the promotion of dissatisfaction materially, right? So satisfaction, dissatisfaction, like this is what our media is holding out for us: the promise of satisfaction sexually, and the promotion of dissatisfaction materially, to become dissatisfied with what we have. And so we actually need to put guardrails in to protect us, because this is where the flow of traffic is going. And here's, I want to make the case for you today. And so I'm going to start in a place that seems extreme, that is probably, as I said, provocative for you, to saying, really? But I'm going to build a case for saying, yeah, this is kind of the air we're breathing. And I need guardrails, because otherwise I'm moving in the direction of the edge. So I want to start with, in terms of the area of like lust and sexual immorality. First of all, start with this idea of human trafficking. Human trafficking is something that, and I've spoken on it a few times. We have partners that we've worked with in our church to fight human trafficking. And listen, anywhere that I have talked about it, not even just in faith context, but to anyone, and in our culture, we're like, no, this is wrong. This is illegal. This is immoral. This is reprehensible. And that people would be trafficked. But at the core of this idea, even though our society recognizes this is wrong, we have laws against it, we have people trying to prosecute it, and place charges on it. The core idea of human trafficking is that primarily, like, a woman or girl is an object, not a person, that exists for someone else's satisfaction, right? So that's it's not a person, it's an object that can be trafficked, that can be sold, that can be commoditized and abused even. That is the core idea around human trafficking, right? So I'm not saying anything that probably you don't know or that seems strange to you. Like, no, that's true. But let's broaden the circle. Let's move to something that is not considered or borderline illegal, strip clubs and prostitution. In fact, we live in a country that's trying to actually move towards the legalization or decriminalization of prostitution. And there are many strip clubs, as one of the city councilors in our city told me one day, oh, those are legitimate businesses. And yet, those businesses exist, even though in our city we have zoning for those places that are allowed to exist, strip clubs, massage parlors. Um, those, even though they're considered sort of legitimate businesses, they are built on the same idea, the commodification, the selling of human beings, that it is perfectly legitimate to go and pay money to just look at another human being, to use them, either looking at them or using them sexually for one's own satisfaction. It's the same idea that's at the root of human trafficking, even though we say this stuff is legal, that stuff isn't. And even though if you ask the heads of Vice Squad in York Region, if we've met with them before, saying the linkages between human trafficking, strip clubs, prostitution are seamless. And yet the idea is the same, but our culture says, no, one's wrong, one's okay, or moderation, probably not great, but hey, can't tell people what to do. Now let's broaden it even further. What about pornography? Internet pornography, you may not know this, that the pornographic sites on the internet have more views than LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Netflix combined. It is a multi-billion-dollar worldwide industry. And it also is based on this one premise, the same core idea that exists in human trafficking and prostitution, strip clubs, that another human is an object for my satisfaction. That is what we are saying when we view pornography. And yet, this is sweeping the world by storm. It is, as one person has described, the public health crisis of the digital age. And yet, we have a culture that says, well, yeah, it's not so bad, or, maybe it'd even be helpful in marriages or relationships, or just in moderation, kind of like alcohol, not when you're younger, but when you're older. And hey, it's kind of inevitable, right? People are going to use it, and it's sort of a joke, or it shows up on a Friends episode or whatever, and it's kind of a punchline or something like that. And definitely a private matter, like don't tell people not to view it. The problem is we are having epidemic levels of views. The average age for people viewing it is between 11 and 13. And that a Media Smart study did a number of years ago in Ontario schools said that 2/3 of grade 11 boys were regular users of this. But the impact of it is like heroin on the mind, on the brain, like drugs. If we said 2/3 of boys were using heroin regularly, it would be a public health crisis, would it not? But that's what's actually happening. And it actually, can I even say, in some ways, it's worse than heroin because you have to use another person to get it. And they say in the internet generation of pornography, this is not your parents' or grandparents' pornography in a magazine tucked away in some store. It is broadly available. And because there's so many views, the traffic is so high, pornographers keep pushing the envelope so it gets more and more violent as well. So this isn't just explicit sexual material, it's explicitly violent sexual material. And this is happening. And yet our culture is saying, well, you can't tell people what to do. It's still based on the same idea. Now, at this point, probably most of you in the room would say, well, none of those three things, like human trafficking, strip clubs, prostitution, pornography, none of those things are things I want to view or participate in or whatever. And that's not good. And I know that. But let me now broaden it and get into the place where you're like, come on. Okay. What about award-winning music? Like hip hop and rap has taken the world by storm. And one of the great contributions, I think, of hip hop and rap music to this culture and to this world, it has moved the race conversation forward. But can I say that in doing so, it has moved the conversation about women backwards? Rap music is full of derogatory terms towards women, primarily by men, but even women using those derogatory. There are no derogatory terms for men, only women. And here's what's so damaging about the derogatory, and I won't say them out loud, but you know what they are. They're words that describe women as a collective group in a negative way or in an over-sexualized way. Hitler's ability to oppress the Jewish population in World War II, in Nazi Germany, began with his ability to label them as rats, as people, as to dehumanize them with a label, to put them all in one group. Once you have dehumanized and labeled an entire group of people, you can oppress them. It's the same reason that white slave owners and white supremacists use a negative derogatory word for Black people in the South so that they could put them all under one group and oppress them together. Friends, this is happening in mainstream music. If you look at the top 10 songs that are playing and streaming around the world, even just take, for example, Jack Harlow, Doja Cat, The language in those is aggressive and is actually sexually violent as well. And this is mainstream. This is being consumed. It's the kind of things that if somebody said to you on the street, you could charge them with sexual assault or with harassment. But we are letting them say them into our ears because they can put music to it, and because they can put music to it and write it, we're actually giving them awards and giving them money and giving them streams to make more, based on the same idea. It's the same idea that women are, I have to say this, in generally speaking, in hip hop and rap, women generally are portrayed as less than human, and you can use another person for your own sexual satisfaction. It's the same idea that exists at the core of human trafficking, at the core of strip clubs and prostitution, at the core of pornography. The circles have broadened. The core idea is the same. Let me keep poking. What about binge-worthy drama on as streaming services have replaced network television? One of the things, certainly many of the dramas and the writing have gotten better. There's more great media available to us. But one of the things that has happened to this, a byproduct, is that graphic sex scenes are a normal part of streaming media. It wasn't when it was network television. It is now. Like if somebody, you wouldn't go into someone's home and watch them in their most intimate moments with a partner. And if somebody invited you to do that, you think that's so weird. No, I would never do that. And yet we are doing that every night in our homes by what we stream. And you may say, well, I'm not watching it to objectify another human or to get sexual satisfaction. But that's what the producers are putting the content on there for. And so actually, even when Game of Thrones exploded, one of the most, I think, rarely talked about, those mentioned a couple of times in news outlets, that was so dangerous about this, it included sexual violence. Like this was now becoming the norm of critically acclaimed award-winning drama. The core idea is still the same. And now let's step back even further into the world of just everyday posts on social. I mean, Instagram is a gateway to pornography. These are and TikTok. That's why these two services are being flagged, and like kids, and they're saying, "Hey, don't be on those things," because they're gateways to pornography. But even beyond that, follow me because I'm nice to look at, right? Is a tried and true tested strategy on social media. Follow me because I'm nice to look at. That is the way to get views, to get likes, and men and women, girls and boys trying to get each other to send each other suggestive pictures or whatever. Why? Based on the same reason. I know it's a long way from human trafficking. My point isn't that if you use social media, you're going to end up in human trafficking or using another person in pornography or something like that. My point is that it's based on the premise that an image of a person is something to be used for your own enjoyment. The world of social media in many ways revolves around that. Friends, I know this is extreme and this is provocative, but my point is that the flow of traffic in media is moving towards the edge. It is the promise of satisfaction sexually by using another person for that satisfaction. This is the air we're breathing, the air we're streaming. And it is moving us opposite to the direction of the way of love. Let's talk about greed for a moment. The problem none of us think we have, right? Let's start again at the center of something which we would all go, no, that's illegal, that's immoral, that's unethical, that's reprehensible. Can't believe somebody would do that. Theft, fraud, right? Let's say that that's the center of it, and that the heart of someone who would end up stealing money from other people, end up, in an internet scam or calling people who are older, who aren't used to using technology, or maybe have lost some of their faculties and stealing money from them. This is happening all the time, right? And scams, and we're well aware of that. People who would do that or defraud someone or embezzle money or use their position of influence in a financial institution to do something wrong, we'll look at that and say, but ultimately what they're doing is they're valuing money and possessions over people. They are willing to take advantage and use people in order to acquire wealth and possessions, right? That's at the heart of that. We'd say, no, that's wrong. That's illegal. Okay, but let's broaden that a little bit more. What about bankruptcy? What about people having barely affordable mortgages or paying the minimum on large debts? We have a financial system that allows us to do this, right? These things actually aren't considered illegal. We are enabled by the financial system to, at times, if we need it, declare bankruptcy or to take mortgages that we can barely afford or to just pay the minimum on massive debts that continue to accumulate. Our financial system says this is fine. And many people have ended up putting their families or their companies or other loved ones at risk because of their decisions. Why? The promise of being able to have more or acquire more or live up to a certain standard or afford a certain size of house or a house at all or whatever it is. It's the idea of pursuing possessions and monetary gain and at times not considering the impact on other people. It is valuing things over people. It's the same core idea. Now let's broaden it a few times more, right? Because the first two we'd say, oh, those are clearly over the edge, or that's not good, right? Theft and fraud, no, definitely illegal, wrong. And no, you don't want to have to declare bankruptcy. And no, you don't want to have to like just pay the minimum on massive amount of debts. But let's just step back and broaden it to things that we definitely are all participating in some way. Again, the flow of traffic towards the edge. Compulsive shopping, sports betting, even a little bit, or streaming get rich quick content. Right? Here's how to build your business. Here you can make money from home. Here I did this, built this internet business from home. I've got making collective passive income of $500,000 a year, and we are streaming those things. Why? Get rich quick schemes. That this is something perhaps that many of us are involved in, based on the same idea of holding out the dissatisfaction material, dissatisfaction with where you are in order to get these other things. That begins to increase the priority of money and wealth and possessions, perhaps and possibly over people. And then broaden it even further. We all do. Browsing on realtor.ca, watching home shows, following travelers or foodies or wealthy entrepreneurs in our social streams. What is that constantly exposing us to? New ideas on how to love people well? No. Experiences you could have, food you could eat, things you could do, equipment you could buy to be able to make such and such a thing at home, or how you could improve your home and it only costs this, and how to upgrade and how to build. What? It is constantly playing on dissatisfaction materially in our lives. That is the flow of traffic for many of the channels we subscribe to and the shows we stream. And then let's step back even further and put ourselves in the mix. As we post about our own travels, our own experiences, our own possessions, or we follow the posts of others. We say, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just sending it to, my circle of 600 friends on Instagram or whatever it is. But the priority, oftentimes, or at times, the emphasis and the focus is not necessarily how to love people better or how to love the people who are watching what we're posting, but how we post about the things that we have experienced, the places we've gone, the stuff we've been able to afford or buy, or we follow others who do that, even within our own family, our own circle of friends, and our own community of faith. The point is in that all of these things, some things you say, oh, that's clearly over the line. Other things we say, man, this is just what we're doing all the time. The flow of traffic is towards dissatisfaction materially that ultimately begins to increase our focus on things and possessions and wealth and decrease our focus on people, right? Which is at the heart of even the most egregious financial decisions of theft and fraud, is valuing things over people, moving us in the opposite of the direction of the way of love. And so, friends, if we are actually going to follow the way of Christ, which look what he says the way of Christ is in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2. Live a life filled with love, or follow the way of love, following the example of Christ. Look at, he loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us. This is the idea of actually saying to follow the way of Christ is to be willing to sacrifice myself. Like, we're not asked to die on a cross like Jesus did. We are asked to die to ourselves, our impulses, our inclinations, to die to the propensity or the bent towards using another person for our satisfaction. In a sense, dehumanizing someone else for it, or in the thing of beginning to value things, possessions, wealth, houses, experiences more than we value people. We have to die to those, to follow the way of Jesus. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're saying, hey, I don't have to do that, perhaps you can see, man, where the flow of traffic goes is in an unloving direction. And to begin to choose to love others, it means I have to sacrifice myself. Things that I say I'm entitled to. I can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. A bunch of the things I listed are things that you would say, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm free to do that. Yes, but a guardrail is to freely choose to limit yourself in order to love others better. So, what are some of the sacrifices we can make with our media to begin to actually push the flow of traffic in another direction? And here's what I'm saying: the guardrails that we would put in life, they're basically on our media. And I'm going to read just a few suggestions: is to resist objectification, like objectifying or dehumanizing another person, using them for our own satisfaction, and to resist dissatisfaction with what we have, with what we wear, with where we live, and what our lifestyle is, right? That's what the guardrails are for, to resist objectification and dissatisfaction. In a sense, our guardrails are a resistance movement to help us to stay away from a fall we would never make and to love people better, right? That's what our guardrails are for. It's a resistance to love people instead of using them for our satisfaction, to love people more than things. Our guardrails are this resistance movement to the flow of traffic. So here's a few suggestions. And as I said to you last week, these are just suggestions. They're not prescriptions. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm trying to give you practical examples of what might this look like in your life. And so I have a couple of things here, what we can choose not to do and what we can choose to do instead. Choose not to do, to follow the way of Christ. You may need to choose to not follow some people on Pinterest, on Instagram, on YouTube. You may need to unfollow, right? To follow the way of love, you may need to not follow certain people that, nothing wrong with following them, but it's leading you in a direction of objectifying people or valuing stuff more than people. For some of us, we may need to choose not to listen. And can I say this? Maybe to delete some clean songs on your playlist. Just because there isn't an F-bomb in it doesn't mean it's a clean song or that's the clean version, right? That's the myth of mature content, mature audiences in a clean version. You may need, can I just suggest, delete any song in your playlist that uses a derogatory term about a woman. Even if they blank it out in the clean version, that's the heart of that song, of that artist. That's their view of women that you are allowing into your ears over and over and over again. Can I say instead, we should actually support some of our Christian artists, especially our Christian hip hop writers? I mean, Christian music when I was growing up was terrible. It wasn't good quality at all. There are so many good Christian artists, but because we just say, oh, they're not popular, they don't get radio play. These are people trying to move the direction in the flow of love. And they're not getting radio play. How are they going to get it? Is when Christian people are saying, yeah, we're moving in that direction too, are actually supporting them, are choosing to support them instead. That's something you can do. But maybe some of you need to begin by deleting some songs off your playlist. Another thing to not do, maybe to post a bit less about your possessions or your experiences. Just check your social media stream and say, hey, how much am I posting about what I've bought or where I've been or something new that you may not be trying to promote dissatisfaction in somebody else, but you know what that does to you. I mean, I know that does that for me, right? The more I'm exposed to what I don't have, the more I'm dissatisfied with what I do have. And so we all contribute to that in our circle of friends, in our social media. So check yourself. Maybe I'm going to post a little bit less about some of that. And then maybe for some of you, you know what? We need to choose to not stream certain shows we love. You're like, oh, it's so good. We're in season. Yeah, but maybe it's just exploitative to the people that are actually being shown on that screen. Maybe it's not why you're watching it, but it's a part of the whole thing. And so maybe for you, the freedom to limit yourself that way. And what about what we can choose to do? If you are battling porn at any stage, at any life, two things I'll say: ask for help. Do not go through this alone, right? This is something that will ultimately devalue you and is devaluing the people you are watching. So ask for help. Go to fightthenewdrug.org. It's not even a Christian publication or website, but it has so much information and research helping you on. This is something we need to do proactively for that. And next week, I'm actually going to talk about what proactive steps we can take in community if we're fighting stuff like that. Some of you may want to add a tech-free day or afternoon to your weekly schedule. And if you're in a family and you got kids at home, maybe say, hey, like Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon is tech-free for us. That would be a great step to take as a family. Just say, just in general, we can choose to push this out of our lives for a few hours a week. Another one talks about how gratitude, right? Like that's one of the things mentioned in this passage is actually, which is about being satisfied with what we do have, right? Practicing gratitude, making a gratitude list, or before your feet hit the floor every morning, just saying, God, I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful for this, to promote true satisfaction in our hearts. And then this one I think is really powerful and has been helpful for me. Read biographies of people who valued people, right? Read their stories. And two, just to suggest, one is John M. Perkins. He's written a few books, but Let Justice Roll is an incredible one. He's a social activist, really well written. And another book that I loved, it's actually 13 mini biographies, like one per chapter, in a book called Soul Survivor by Philip Yancey. It's actually not about this stuff, but the impact of reading stories of other people who loved people begins to increase your own love for people. You know, religious communities seem to be very good at judging what other people are doing or judging what the outsiders or what the world is doing without critically looking at themselves to see what's going on. Religious communities are great at saying how bad the world is without actually examining our own hearts. And so for Jesus people, we are not a religious community. We follow Jesus. We walk in the way of love. What would it mean for us as a community to embrace guardrails as a resistance movement, as a gift to the world around us, as a community, instead of just complaining how bad the world is, saying, hey, what can I do in my own life that moves the flow of traffic away from the edge and into more directly, little by little, the way of love.